Afternoon everyone, I'm wearing a hat today because my hair is a complete mess. It's actually getting rather long if you remember where it was at the start of the year. It was nothing like this, but there we go, we're stuck with it now. Anyway, to business. Last week I said I was going to rewatch Nausicaä of the Valley of the Winds and encouraged you all to do the same. Now that it's not going to be spoiler territory, I suppose I can now talk about it in a bit more detail. First off, obviously, considering the age of the film, it was originally released in 1984. It's a massive technical accomplishment. I think the visuals in it are just absolutely stunning. You look at even the hand animated portions or the matte painted backgrounds, anything like that. It's all just really nice to look at. And I think that considering it was made sort of before Studio Ghibli officially existed, it sort of serves as this amazing manifesto for what their style and just about everything that informed the studio moving forward would become. It's got themes including environmentalism and mankind's connection to nature. That's going to come up in a lot of their future works, including, My Neighbor Totoro, which was released later on. It's got the weird worlds and strange environments that we'd also see in a lot of their future work, like Tales from Earthsea, although that film does sort of skate around, whereas this one lets you get really deep into the history and lore of this one fictional universe that they've created. And you've got the strong female lead in Nausicaä herself. This continued to show up in a lot of Miyazaki's films, sort of arguably culminating in Princess Mononoke in 1997. I think that one was released. I've just checked, and yeah, it was 1997, so they basically had 13 years to refine that archetype, but still it's sort of birthed here, I would say, off the back of an anime that they started writing when initially it didn't look like they were going to be able to get funding for a film. Looking at this film, it's clearly seeding some other themes as well. It looks at sort of the use of weapons of mass destruction. There's a clear allegory there with the ancient warriors that appear sort of at the start of the film and left the world in the state that it's in. Obviously, Grave of the Fireflies, their later work would touch on this as well. They're a clear allegory for sort of nuclear weapons, the sort of blight and toxicity that they leave in the world that actually did cause the toxic jungle, as it turns out. And it's clear that there's sort of a very strong anti-war sentiment running through the whole thing. Watching the film, you sort of come to realise that although these human civilizations are committing these acts of war on the basis of trying to stave off the toxic jungle, it is really only each other that they're ever fighting. No progress is made against the toxic jungle at all, apart from when, towards the final act, Nausicaä does decide to sort of try and collaborate and live in harmony with it. Although you've got to say that in our universe, the coming of the toxic jungle cannot be a bad thing, because it leads to some of the most breathtaking environments that you'll ever see in this or even any of the later Studio Ghibli films. There are just so many individual screenshots from this film that you could capture, and I'd have the majority of them framed on my wall. I don't, but imagine just any of those matte paintings, any of the backgrounds from the toxic jungle with sort of the bizarre plants and all that sort of thing. They're just beautiful, aren't they? In terms of the soundtrack, they've got Joe Hisaishi, who at the time was just working as an experimental jazz musician. That does sort of come across, rather than the later works, which are obviously more couched in orchestral sounds, all that sort of thing. This one has a few numbers which wouldn't feel out of place as the fighting music in a Final Fantasy game, something that may have felt familiar to you if you've ever played any of these video games upon even a first watching of this film. But then there's also the more melodic sections, just absolutely breathtakingly gorgeous melodies in there. It's a soundtrack that I've been listening to, far more than I would ever have time to watch the film. During lockdown, actually, go for a little walk, put any of the bits from it on, and it just works really beautifully in an earth-based natural environment as well. I'm nodding over there because the camera's by my window, so I can see some nature just outside. Now, I'm a big fan of Studio Ghibli's oeuvre as a whole, but why did I go for this film, which technically wasn't even made by Studio Ghibli, rather than one of the later ones? You may have noticed at several moments during this video I've mentioned other films that they've made. Really, it just seems that this is the blueprint, this is ground zero for their films. It was the first one they actually made, and indeed a lot of the themes and other devices that they use in this will come up time and again if you watch the rest of their filmography. So this is a good jumping off point if you haven't seen any of their work. If you have seen any of their work and you haven't seen this one, I'd recommend it as well. Just watch this film if you haven't already. For God's sake, it's nearing the end of the video. I'm obviously only able to touch on a few things here. If you do want some further reading, there's a really good article on Medium by David L. Reeve. I'll link this and all of the other things that I'm about to mention down below. There's a really nice read on Film School Rejects about this film as well. I checked both of these out. I've referenced them quite a lot here, so it's definitely worth giving those a read. Or if you just want something more hands-off, Renegade Cut has a really nice video essay on it, and there is of course an episode of I think it's called Ghibliotech. They pronounce the Ghibli with a hard G. I say Ghibli, but you know, let's not split hairs. We're all friends in the world of Studio Ghibli. There's also my Letterboxd account. I'll link that down below as well. It's got my review of this film as well as a whole lot of others. So if you do have any interest in what films I think you should watch, you know, go check on there. You'll also find my review for the film that I would like you to watch this week, that being Captain Fantastic. It's a Viggo Mortensen film that isn't Lord of the Rings or History of Violence, and yeah, I'd really thoroughly recommend watching that one. I'll talk about it more next week, but for the time being, here's a reading of my review from Letterboxd. Excellent performance from Viggo Mortensen as always, and from a lot of the young actors as well, which is lucky as the film takes great care to show us the personality of the kids individually. Very pleasant movie to watch without ever feeling too light, or without the heft necessary to really leave an impression. But that's it from me today, guys. As I say, I would recommend watching Captain Fantastic for next week, and I will see you then. Stay safe.